Hello everyone. This is the first of two talks on how to fly 100K plus in the UK cross-country on a paraglider. The first talk is on the general principles and the skills required to do such a flight. And the second, I'll do a deep dive into the weather and how you can plan those flights. A paraglider, we get lift in 4 different ways. The first is thermal lift, where we get warm air lifting up, going upwards, and we just harness the ability of along with the harness the power warm air going up. Second one is ridge lift, when the wind hits a hill or elevation, and that diverts the wind upwards, and we can serve that area of diverted wind. And finally, wave lift, where the hill hits at a certain angle in certain meteorological conditions and causes a wave effect, standing wave, so to speak, downwind. And finally, convergence lift, where two air masses meet and converge, and therefore it can't go anywhere else but upwards. So very rarely do we use wave lift or ridge lift to help us to get cross-country flying in the UK. Mainly we use thermal lift, and very occasionally we use convergence. So ridge lift is familiar to most beginner paragliders. They launch from a hill, they serve the air going up, and we know all about it. It's sometimes known as dynamic lift, and it works very well when there are no thermals and happenings. But it doesn't give us any lift very much beyond maybe twice the height of the hill, and very rarely does it give us very much enough height to get cross-country flying. It's thermals that we use mainly, and thermals rise until a point where it condenses in the cloud. This is in the cloud base, for example, and this is often in the spring and summer months. They are very on good days. The thermals would pop out, and we can use that to do our cross-country flights. And basically, it's quite simple. All we want to do is go from one thermal to the next, and get as high as possible when you're in thermal, and fly as fast as possible in between thermals. And when we hit the next thermal, we go up again and again and again. And that is basically how it works. Therefore, to fly far, we need basically to get high, get to the thermal, get to the cloud base, and stay high as long as possible. And a key skill required to get high and stay high is thermaling, the art of carving and coring a thermal. The second skill you need is to read the sky, to give us a clue as to where the next thermal is going to be downwind of where you are, or upwind for that matter if you're flying triangles, and to read the terrain as to work out both from the terrain and the clouds in the sky where the next thermal is likely to be. Understanding weather is part of the key skill required. To know what the weather is doing and how it evolves through the day will give you an idea of what to expect during a flight. And planning a flight is very important, and a thorough knowledge of the airspaces that you in your flight plan is vital if you want to stay high, fly far, and fly legally. So the key skill is thermaling, and here in the Peak District, for example, we have a lot of paraglider pilots. You fly along with them, and they often spot the thermals for you. You can, as you're beginning, you can follow them, and as they sense where the thermals are, and you work your way up the thermal together. How do you know that you have hit a thermal? When you approach a thermal, there are things that are clues. First of all, there's increased turbulence. You feel your gliders shake a little bit. There's increased either sink rate, and increased perceived wind, either your ground speed increases or decreases. When you hit the thermal, your glider tends to rock back. Some thermals behave differently, but most gliders will rock back a little bit and start. You have to start to work pitch, stabilize the pitch, and start to enter a thermal. And as you enter thermal, obviously the air is rising, your various starts to increase in pitch and volume, and you know you're happily in a thermal. First thing to know is when you hit a thermal, what to do. Getting used to your glider, knowing your wing is vitally important, because wings do behave differently in thermals. But generally speaking, you have to relax. Don't fight your wing. Most of you are flying E and B wings, which will not do anything untoward if you just relax and let it fly. Don't fight your wing. Gently correct any pitching actions by using your brakes if necessary to control pitch and roll, and use when you start the turn, use weight shift and inside brake. Weight shift is the most efficient way of turning a glider, and too much brake on would kill the wing's performance. So and increase your chance of stalling the glider. So avoid using too much brake, and certainly not avoid using the outside brake too much. As I said, gliders do behave differently, so practicing on your glider in winter months with ridge soaring will help you understand the behavior of glider, how much dampening you need, how much pitch control you need. Use your brakes to dampen any surges with gentle jabs rather than a firm pull down and jab, rather than keeping it down all the time, which kills performance. To thermal efficient, don't use too much outside brake. Use the inside brake. Once you establish in the thermal, don't be afraid to bank up and turn tight. So when you hit the thermal, there are several questions you got to ask. Is this thermal good enough for me to get high? Or generally speaking, how big is the question you got to ask? Is the thermal big enough? Is it strong enough? So obviously, if you hit a thermal, it might just be a gentle thermal, 1 meter per second climb, and it might not be. And you got a sink rate which increases when you turn, obviously. And if you make a 360 and you lose height, that's not going to be very good for you. So you want a thermal that's good enough for you to make a complete 360 and stay high and go up. The common mistake people make is to make a turn too quickly. When you're taking off from a hillside, you're taking off into wind, and most thermals you'll find will be into wind. So the first turn is often into wind, and therefore you have to really give it a bit of time for your glider to actually enter a thermal properly. The tip I tell people is count bananas. If you can count up to 5 bananas and it's still going up, that's usually a good sign that thermal is good enough for turn. So gradually your value will increase in pitch, and wait till it peaks before you turn. So basically you wait until you fly into right in the corner, the core of the thermal, the highest, strongest bit, and then as you come off it, then you start to turn. So you can always turn into it. So basically, when your value is increasing in pitch, until right at the top of it screaming at you, and then gradually then starts to slow down, decrease in pitch, then you turn. So you wait till you get maximum pitch, wait till you pass that maximum area, and you start to decrease, then you make a turn. So you always turn into a thermal. So if you do that technique, whether you turn left or right, whether it's a right turn, whether it doesn't matter, so long as you use the same technique all the time. So maybe you are in a situation where you make a turn and it's a wrong one. The thermal is to the left, but you turn to the right. Doesn't matter. Keep turning. Eventually, you hit the thermal again, and eventually it will increase in pitch until you hear it peaking out here, and then start to decrease. Now you turn again, then you turn, and every time you do this, you always get into the middle. This is the basic thermaling technique, and it always works. So feel your glider, listen to your glider, listen to your vario. Vario is also different in ability, in the lag time between the lift it senses and telling you with that on the bleeper, the bleeping device on the audio. So you need to work out and correct according to your vario. So getting used to your vario is very, very important, and getting to use the one vario, every vario is slightly different, and therefore its response rate and time is different. So you have to work with your vario and find out what's most efficient. So in a nutshell, when a barrier pitch goes up, you open up your turn. When your barrier pitch starts to go down, you tighten your turn. Once you decide whether to make a right turn or left turn, stick to that orientation. Don't keep changing, because that will lose efficiency. So if you're right turning on this thermal, to stay on that right turn all the time. Also, if you're entering a thermal where others are thermaling, always make sure you join the same turning direction as your nearest glider, and always enter behind the glider, not in front of them. So by following them and turning in the same direction, you're less likely to run to collision causes with anyone else. So there are certain thermaling myths you might hear from other pilots or hear from some lectures online. One thermal myth is so-called flat turns are better. What do you mean by flat turns? I think people mean by flat turns mean that turns that are slow and yaw turns rather than banked up turns. Are they better? Well, there's no reason why it should be. They should be better, because you are in the same air that's moving up, and whether all you want is your sink rate to be as low as possible, and most gliders, the sink rate is lowest when they are when you use when they're flown most efficiently. So that's so it doesn't really make sense. To achieve bank turns, some people would advocate counter steering, means weight shifting away from the turn and using the brakes on the side to counteract. This is really inefficient and kills the glide of the glider. So the best way is to just use your inside brake to steer your turns, and use your outside brake just to stop any pitching motion too much, control the glide a little bit. Some people believe in fixing the inside brake and use the outside brake to control the turn. Again, it makes little sense to me. If it works for you, that's fine, but it doesn't really, it's not a way of making the turns more efficient. So when you get into thermal, keep climbing until you get to right to top. Generally speaking, there is when you get to cloud base, there's often a layer of air that is quite stable and that doesn't rise anymore. We call it the subcloud layer. Sometimes you get cloud suck where you don't have a subcloud layer, and the condensation of the moisture releases more energy and you get more suck. It depends. Some days you're more like some clouds, and some days you're more likely to get that kind of situation than others. Just but get as high as possible. Learn descent techniques. If you do get into cloud suck, you must know how to get away from it. When you get a cloud base, it's often wise just to stay to the edge of the cloud if you're not sure. When you get into thermal with no wind, it's fairly straightforward. The strongest bit of thermal will always be in the center, and then with the core, and then the air will rise to the top to form a cloud, and then it will sink around the edges. This is fairly typical, so the core will always be in the center. When there is wind, however, quite a lot of things changes. And when it's in wind, the wind causes the stronger bits of thermal to stay less affected and therefore stay further upwind, and the weaker bits of thermal to be downwind. So it no longer is a strongest bit in the center. The strongest bit is always upwind of you. Furthermore, you can see that the air going in towards the thermal in the windward direction, often is in upward direction, whereas behind in the lee of it, you get sinking air. So basically, when you're flying into wind, as you do on a ridge, taking off from the ridge, you fly into wind. The thermal is always upwind of you. When you're flying downwind, like in cross country, it's different. When you hit a thermal, it's often works very quickly. So basically, if you're flying upwind to get a thermal, always count at least 5 bananas before you make a turn. And flying downwind, 1, 2, 3 bananas is probably enough for you to start making a turn, and you'll still work your way up to the strongest bit of thermal. The other principle of cross-country flying is between transitions, between rising air, you are in sinking air, because air has got to some goes up, what goes up must come down eventually. And so in this situation, you often get very sinking air, and therefore you want to fly as fast as possible. How fast you fly, we use this McCready curve. You probably read this in your pilot's exam. These are all designed by sailplane pilots, and the whole idea is to fly as most efficiently as possible to get the best glide as possible. So basically, it's maximize your glide kind of computing. So obviously, if you are if you're into wind, and if you're in sinking air, you have to fly faster. And if you are, but that will kill your glide. But at least you get further. If you are obviously in gives rise to a curve we call the sailplane polar. However, we don't have these McCready computers on our paragliders, and the range of speed that we can't control pitch in paragliders, so the range of speeds we can fly in is more limited. And therefore, we really need just a rule of thumb. And basically, my rule of thumb is as follows: if your sink rate is less than 1 meter per second on trim, then fly trim. That's probably most efficient. If your sink rate is between 1 and 2 meters per second, fly half bar, half acceleration. And if it's more than 2 meters per second, full bar. And as generally speaking, with transitions in cross-country flying, you'll face sink rates of 1.5 to 2 meters per second in between transitions, and therefore it's usually half bar or full bar between transitions. If you're in a nice cloud street, obviously it's different. You might get buoyant air and sink rates of less than 1 meter per second. Then you can fly trim and still go very far. How do you find thermals? That's the next question. Well, the easiest solution is to look at others you're flying with. If you're in a group, it's usually quite, and you're new to thermaling, just watch what others are doing. If they found a thermal, they start circling. So if you know who the good pilots are, because you don't want to follow an incompetent pilot, but if you know who your good pilot friends are, follow them. They are the ones to follow. Soaring birds, debris, sounds, smells, all these also heighten your sensation that the thermal's around. And good pilots usually can sense using all the senses, but mainly our eyes, but sometimes other to find the thermals. Clouds is a good source of thermals, so there's always a good thermal under a good developing cloud. And ground sources, it's worth knowing where the ground sources are, where the likely trigger points are, and that's to do with the nature of the environment and hills and environment that you are flying in. So understanding how a thermal is therefore understanding how a cloud forms. And Most days you fly cross country, there will be clouds forming. Some days completely blue, but even in very blue days, you often see small bits of developing moisture condensation happening because it's never completely dry in the UK. And basically, a cloud evolves like this. So you have a bubble of air rising, rising, rising. Eventually, it forms a cloud. Initially, a small little puffy cloud. Then it develops into a nice, more solid-looking cloud, and eventually into a bigger cloud. And eventually, it then fades away and dies away. Eventually, um, the the, you can use these thermals, but with this large developed cloud, and you're just taking off from here, you're not going to get there because that you've missed the bus, so to speak. And obviously, these won't give you much lift. So there you are in real pictures of real clouds with the different types of clouds. These little puffy little clouds are often the start of a thermal. As if you watch them, they will grow and grow and grow and eventually become a larger cloud. If you see a cloud like this, for example, you can see two little bumps and one big bump. Almost certainly the big bump is where the strongest bit of the thermal is, and these are the smaller bumps showing weaker parts of the thermal. And you can see the darker bits also suggest that this is the strongest bit. So you aim for the strongest, darkest bit of the cloud, you're more likely to get lift. When it gets to quite a mature looking thermal, the cloud, sorry, that this might still work. It's got a flat bottom, but you might struggle to reach it if the thermal's past it, and obviously it will eventually decay, and then you would lose that thermal. When you are flying from a site that's got known to be a good site for cross country, often it's near a source of thermals that are regularly releasing. So on a good day on a site like Bradwell, for example, you'll find that thermals release regular intervals. You can feel that if you just stand on the front, feel the wind build up and then die away, build up and then die away at regular intervals. And you can time them, and they're often up when it's on a good day, maybe 5 to 10 minutes apart. Which means that you can harness that these thermals keep working. And not only that, you can if it's pulse release of thermals, you are on this thermal, you get a top, you think, yeah, fine, and then you can see downwind there might be another one, another little cloud that's been released 5 minutes before, and you can fly in there towards it, and you might still catch the remnants of it, and might still get. And this you can sometimes find two or three linked thermals, so to speak, downwind of where you took off, and that's really helpful to get you away from the site and get as far as possible in your initial part of the day. The initial part of the day is quite a tricky bit of the day because sometimes you get it's the thermal is just starting to work. It's not fully developed yet, and and it's helpful to have a site where you get pulsatile thermals release because then you can get the first hour of your flight in relatively ease before you have to depend on ground sources of thermals to get you going again. Sometimes a cloud triggers thermals downwind, and that's very helpful if you're on a site which is where the sun is behind you, and therefore the cloud will trigger thermals downwind of you, and that will be helpful as well. On some days, you get cloud streets forming, and if that happens, that's a jackpot. That's great. You got a situation where you can fly very fast in between thermals. Unfortunately, it's not that common in the UK to find these beautiful cloud streets, but it does occur, and when it does occur, that's really helpful. More often than not, as the day progresses, the clouds develop and fill in the day. That means they keep a full layer of cloud, and that covers the ground. It becomes the heat, surface heating with solar heating on the ground, then stops, and then thermals start to die off, and it's a tough day in situation to get going. So the next question is to ask is, where are the ground sources? Where I might find where thermals? UK is largely flat, not hilly-like. In hilly conditions, it's fairly easy because all you need to know is where the sun is shining, where it hits a slope, and where the wind is coming from. And when the wind and the sun hits the same slope going upwards, then the thermals almost always going to be triggered off. So there's a peak like that with the sun on it and the wind coming in like this, that will almost certainly trigger a thermal. So it's understanding what the wind's doing, understanding where the sun is, and therefore any elevation and slope will help. Obviously, as the day progresses, the sun starts rising, and then the angle is to the hill is important. So in a flattish hill, then you have to wait till the sun is high in the sky before it really heats up properly. Whereas in a very um, steep hill, the sun at a lower angle would start heating it, so the thermal will start more quickly. The albedo is also important. That is the how much heat absorption does the ground take. So dark surfaces, black surfaces absorb heat very quick, heats up very quickly and absorbs heat, whereas light-colored or moist conditions are less likely, greenery, less likely to heat up as quickly. So here again, any sun against an elevated ridge will start to trigger off a thermal ground heat quite quickly, and the air gets warmed. The wind then helps to create this thermal bubble, and this thermal bubble eventually forms a cloud, and that's what you want to try to harness. So if you have areas where you have a dark ground, grousey kind of heatherland, then that is going to heat up very quickly because it's got ability to absorb heat quite quickly. Look for areas where there are contrast between the light and the dark areas like this, because this contrast would suggest that that is going to be differentially heated from this, and it's more likely to therefore heat more strongly and therefore be released. Finally, look for where the elevation is. And you can tell in the UK where elevated areas are, even though it looks quite flat from the sky, by the masts, because telephone and 4G masts are always put up on the hill, and therefore that's a helpful clue that there is a elevated area here. So here, for example, in Iam, there's a mast there that's contrasting dark heatherland, and that is a good trigger of thermals. And lo and behold, you get there, boom, 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 you'll get your climbs up to base. Even in flatlands, you can get some clues, and usually, you can get clues as to what's happening. Here, for example, there's a farmhouse. Here you've got a row of some plowed ground, some green, and some plowed land, some foresty area. And again, it's a likely source. It could be a likely trigger of a source for a point for thermals. And here you are, boom, you can get. So there you are. If you are at the edge of wooded areas, it does work as well, especially towards the middle of the day, late afternoon. The woods will start working because they do tend to absorb heat in most of the day, and towards the end of the day, start releasing some of the heat, and some thermals get released in wooded areas. Sometimes build-up areas like villages are a contrast to the green farmlands often, and they're often a good place where you can find a trigger of thermals even in very flat lands. So here, for example, high up, I'm high up, and I can, on a very, very nice day indeed, flying from North Wales, heading towards the Solway Firth, sorry, the Severn, and here I got many choices. I got lots of good-looking clouds that I can work. They do a bit flattish, the afternoon clouds. They might not all work, but there are some choices. I've got a choice of something here. There's a wooded area here, and some brown lands here, and a nice cloud above it. Almost certainly there's a thermal underneath that one. Here I've got some greenhouses here, and these greenhouses, especially late in the afternoon, will be very, very warm indeed. Certainly, a likely source of trigger of thermals and leading to that cloud there. So I've got two choices. However, I do have a river Severn there, so that's another consideration, that it might bring in sea air, and that might be an area of dead air behind it. I've got a lot of choices, and I think whether I take this or that depends on where I am exactly, where position I am in. Probably I'm closer to this position. If that doesn't work, I can always turn towards this, and that will all fairly confident that one of the two will work. So basic exit strategy: when you're high, you read the sky, you fly the clouds. When you're low, you read the sources below and try to work out where the next good thermals like to be. But when you're together, that means you've got mates with you, work together. So teamwork makes the dream work, as they say. So if you've got a group of friends, you're in radio contact, ask them to fly together, maybe a few hundred meters apart, to hunt for thermals. Then you look at each other to find who got the thermals. Then you can work out how. Important when you're thermaling with others that you respect other gliders and avoid collision at all costs. There's nothing, everyone's got their own rig, how they want it. This is mine, it's a very simple rig. The important thing, I fly with the actual air map on my app, on my telephone. Right, I'll discuss flight planning in more detail in my second talk, but basically it starts with weather. We have a wonderful tool called RASP, and that gives a lot of details for the weather. And based on the weather, we can decide what route to plan. We can decide on a start place and an end place, a start site and a target. We have our air charts where we can read the air map, and we check out NOTAMs. There's a NOTAM info website, gives you all the NOTAMs that are likely to happen on your flight route. I'll discuss RASP in detail, but it's got a huge number of parameters that you can work on, and understanding of RASP and understanding weather is a key to flight planning and getting the most out of the day. Understanding these SCUTI charts are also very helpful, and I'll go into more detail in the second talk. Our UK weather is dominated by the jet stream, and generally we wait for areas of good ridges of high pressure that gives us nice fair weather that are good for paragliding. Finally, we have these apps available where you can plan your flight and work out what the airspaces are along your flight on the day. Memorize them as well as fly with a moving air map on your telephone or on whatever app you use, and that will help you navigate through complex airspaces in the UK. Fortunately, we don't have to worry about open corridors, but we can, and we have wonderful NOTAMs website to gives us information about what the NOTAMs are. It looks very complicated, but it's really not that complicated. You just click on the area of interest, and it will tell you what the problems, what issues are. So when the big day arrives, get up early, have a good breakfast, look at the weather forecast, details, particularly look at the satellite, check out the satellite images. Maybe there's more cloud than you expect, and make sure you have enough warm clothing for always slightly overdressed rather than underdressed for your car. It's always colder in cloud-based than you imagine. And finally, a bit of air toilet facilities. Solutions must be, because your flight's going to be at least 4, 5, 6 hours, so you need to have some kind of way of handling the toilet requirements. Um, the the Most of us now fly these pod harness, and pod harness, you can't just empty it in front into your pod harness, so you need some kind of solution, and there are some solutions available. Most people use these convene devices for men, but women will have just to make do with pads. So finally, I'm just going to describe one of the flights I made from EM Edge of the Peak in the Peak District to Bridlington in the coast, and describe how this works and the various points on which you and solutions to the problems I encountered. First of all, takeoff is very nice. EM is a lovely site, and there are lots of pilots there usually on a good day. And here I am, thermally happily with some of the peak paragliding pilots. And it took a while to get going. You could see I was surfing the ridge for quite a bit before I found a thermal that I could use to climb right to cloud base. And when I did, it was typically over the mast here as the thermal gets released, and finally climb all the way up to cloud base. As you can see, sometimes it's not always straightforward, especially in the first climb. You often climb to a certain level. Here, I climbed to about 2,500 feet, and I couldn't find any. The lift started dying, as you can see, and as a result, I had to drift slightly towards the mast behind EM before I found a bit more of the thermal, and eventually climbed up and again drifted before I finally climbed a really good climb up to well into 5.5 grand, I think. As the next phase is to get out of the Peak District and to fly over the west side of Sheffield, and then finally hit the M1 corridor. And this is at that time there was a corridor, which means I had to stay behind under 4,500 feet. Thankfully, that corridor is no longer required there anymore. That's been removed. But at that time, I needed to stay on the Upton corridor under 4,000 feet, and eventually got all the way to M62, crossing the Drax power station here in Selby, and then finally making out my way to finding more thermals in fairly regular intervals. There was a point when I got very low around this area here near Pockington, but eventually got another lift, and that gives me a chance to get high and fly over towards the coast. And as I hit the coast, there was a bit of sea breeze convergence helping, but the winds were also coming in quite strongly, which required me to land just south of Bridlington. So that's a flight of 140 kilometers or so. It's a kind of flight you want to make to the coast, and it's very satisfying to finish off in the coast and having ice creams with your mates, having planned this flight and executed it to perfection, and getting to Bridlington and having ice creams there. Finally, just a short word about sea breeze convergence. As you hit the coast on good days, you might find that the sea breeze comes in, and then and it hits your land breeze, and that causes an area of lift. And it can be very useful because it can get you very high. And you often get these curtain clouds that look like curtains, and It's important that when you get into these sea breeze conversions, not to fly too far downwind or in your and hit the sea breeze, because once you hit the sea breeze, there's no more lift there, and you will end up having to deck it. But if you meet the convergence, usually the plan is either fly north or parallel to the coastline, so that you can maximize the use of this convergence. Unfortunately, these convergences are kind of ephemeral. They come and go very quickly, and and they tend to drift inland towards the day, and then drift back out again. So you need to watch out for that drift. But apart from that, that may extend your flight for a bit longer. Okay, so in summary, to fly far in the UK, to fly over 100K, you need certain skills. It's a goal many paraglider pilots really want to achieve. It's like hitting a century on as a cricketer. You know, it's a great target. And then to do that, you need to get high, stay high. And the key skill to that is thermaling. Also, we need to learn to read the sky and the terrain. Understanding the weather also is very vital, and planning and thorough knowledge of airspace will help you make that 100K flight in the UK on a regular basis. Thank you very much.